Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Fagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
That is a HIPAA violation, and I refuse to answer it.
I fell right into it. You entrapped me into a HIPAA violation. This is entrapment.
Then you know what? This is also a HIPAA violation. I am discussing a HIPAA violation is a HIPAA violation. I don't know if you knew that. It's ridiculous. We're going to cover the HIPAA violation stuff later in the show because it really has become this ridiculous. But welcome to this episode of Norse Code, everyone. Hope you are doing well. We are still in the middle of the off season, but we took last week off because the show before, we were making fun of the fact that there was no news. It was all manufactured stuff, Everson Griffin things, whatever. There wasn't really anything to talk about. So Reef and I said we were going to wait maybe till Wednesday to see if there was a show. There wasn't. And then on Friday, everything starts popping off. So we have something to talk about now. We are blessed with living in interesting times. So we get to discuss all sorts of things, including D.D. Westbrook, Jalen Twyman, Michael Pierce. Thank God we have another nose tackle. The Jeff Gladney situation. And of course, Rick Dennison. Not even to start on the new COVID stuff. The Aaron Rodgers returns and the conditions of his release, all these sorts of things. But before we start, just want to thank all of you so much for listening to this episode of Norse Code. We are looking forward to doing a lot of cool things with you over the next few months. The off season is nearly over. Training camp begins later this week. I think it's later this week.
Yep. Not even that late, like Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah. So we've got training camp opening up. We've got preseason stuff to go through. We have the actual season to start. Looking forward to all of this. Before we do any of that, we got two big announcements coming up. First off, we are going to be doing our first live show in Minnesota. We've talked about doing this for a while. We announced this to the Patreon people about 2 weeks ago and announced it on Twitter as well. So Norse Code is going on the road, and the first stop is going to be Eagan, Minnesota on Thursday, August 12th. It is the first Minnesota live show, and that's going to take place at the Union 32 Craft House. It'll be after 7 p.m. Arif, James, Nessie, and more will be awaiting all those who head over to the live show taping. So there's going to be plenty of stuff out there. I know that the Union 32 Craft House also just unveiled a new Vikings-themed beer as well. So you can check that out. So we're going to be going inside of Union 32 on August 12th. That is the Thursday before the Broncos game. Also, we'll be giving away some stuff. I got some t-shirts, some stickers. I grabbed a baby onesie. So if you need a Norse Code baby onesie, we can talk. And I'll also be giving away a ticket to the over to the Broncos Vikings preseason game. So if you're interested in such things, again, this is going to be Thursday, August 12th at the Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota after 7 p.m. Also, it's almost August 1st. What happens every year on August 1st, Arif?
The fantasy lottery.
The Evil Awakens.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you had a much more dramatic answer than me.
the evil Awakens.
I don't even usually talk during this portion of the show, so I'm on my phone, and you're like, "Yeah, so Arif, here's a prompt." And I'm just like, "Oh God, what did James just say?"
Oh noes!
What am I agreeing to?
The Evil Awakens on August 1st. I accept all nominations, all attempts to get into the fantasy lottery for the 4 fantasy teams that we have for the Norse Code leagues. This league, of course, for those who weren't around for last year or the year before or the year before that, the special rule involving the fantasy teams is that every missed extra point is negative 25 points. It is beautiful. It is breathtaking. It is a sight to behold and an experience unlike any other involving fantasy football. So if you would like to be a part of the drawing, because we get so many names to be a part of the teams, if you would like to be a part of this, you just need to either email norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or you can just DM the Norse Code DN Twitter account, and I will put you down for there. But that I accept I accept names starting August 1st. Because otherwise I'd just be accepting them all year. So August 1st, we will begin the taking of names, and then I will draw names. And you've never been a part of a draft where legitimately a kicker could go in the first round. And it's not
where
necessarily...
legitimately a kicker has gone in the first round.
I did well that year, too.
But Justin Tucker still missed an extra point, so it feels like you just wasted it and you just happened to clean up on the second and third and fourth round picks.
Maybe. But the fantasy lottery does begin on August 1st. So if you're interested in this, please send me an email or just quick DM the Twitter account for the show, and I will put you in the lottery. I believe last year and the year before we had over 200 names or 250 names for 40 slots, 30 slots or something like that. Also, if you are a member of the Patreon, please mark it in there as well, and I'll cross-reference that because I have one just for the Patreon people. So,
exclusive for the pick, because I think Patreon people can still join the other leagues. But.
They can, yes, but we have a thing specific for just Patreon people. Yeah. So we've had Dusty on there before. I play, Arif plays. We are all tortured by this, and we all enjoy the updates during a game day when I screenshot out who is -75 and who is -50, and the fact that they're playing each other is amazing.
I just love that you could be up by 30 points and only have your kicker playing on a Monday night and be sweating it.
Yep.
That's an amazing feeling.
It really is unlike any other fantasy experience. So if you are interested, please check this out and just email me at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or just send a DM to the Norse Code Twitter account. I keep a spreadsheet. I'll make sure you're on it. And we can go from there. Bonus content this week is going to be available at patreon.com/NorseCode. It'll probably be available here in the next couple of days. So if you would like bonus content, you can give Tree Fitty to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. And that's over at patreon.com/NorseCode. Or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. Or you can get yourself a baby onesie, or t-shirt or anything else, but really baby onesies over at norsecode.threadless.com and check out the online store. So all of that is finished. Let's talk about the news, because now we have actual news to talk about. And I suppose the first thing we could talk about is D.D. Westbrook, who posted on Snapchat that he was heading out to Minnesota, or was hanging out by the over by Egan. And he eventually did end up signing a 1-year deal. And there's also an injury that goes along with D.D. Westbrook. So we now have a number 3 receiver.
Yeah. I mean, so I think, one of the issues with this sort of thing is that and this isn't just true for Vikings fans, it's true for everybody, but because it's happened a lot to Vikings fans, it's very easy for me to be like, this happens a lot with Vikings fans. But when you want a player to sign for your team because they're the best available option at a position of need, and you keep on wanting it and it doesn't happen, and it takes a while. I think this happened with Greg Jennings too. It takes a while. And then eventually they sign with the team. At that point, you have talked up that player so much that you think that they are a better player than they are. And D.D. Westbrook is much better than any other non-starting receiver, right? He's clearly a candidate for wide receiver 3, at least in my eyes. I could be wrong about that, but I think he's much better than BB and BC Johnson, and obviously Dan Chisna, KJ Osborne, Emir Smith-Marset, whoever, right? Myron Mitchell, Blake Prohl. He's clearly the candidate. He's clearly going to be, I'm not going to say a shoo-in, but the favorite to be the wide receiver 3, right? But there's a reason he was on the market for that long. There's a reason that he wasn't a starting receiver for the Jaguars last year, which I'll get into in a second. And a reason that, it, he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season, I think, period, right? I'm going to take a look. The problem is that, the Jaguars have had, a bunch of very similar receivers for a while. I think Chris Conley is the only one that hasn't, fit a lot of that profile. like you've got your DJ Charks and your Rashad Greens and your whoever's, and they're all like under 6'2". They all, can win from the slot, Keelan Cole, right? And so it's kind of easy to get kind of confused. But yeah, so he's never had a 1,000-yard season. When he was a wide receiver 1 in 2018, he only got 700 yards. Now, mind you, that was with DeFilippo as the offensive coordinator, not a good offensive coordinator. That was with Blake Bortles as the quarterback, not a good quarterback. So, I mean, like, there's arguments you can make for why, 700 yards is not really representative of the type of talent that he is. But, there's a reason that he wasn't able to beat out players like Keelan Cole and Chris Conley and Colin Johnson and Laviska Shenault for a starting job in 2020. So he has his issues, right? But he should immediately be the favorite to be punt returner and wide receiver 3, and he should probably be able to compete for the kick return job, which is great. He ran 4.39, I think, by the database that most people use at his pro day. I think there was a report that he ran a 4.34 from Oklahoma specifically. Some Oklahoma newspaper found that he ran a 4.34 by talking to somebody. I don't know, but he's fast, and I think he looks like he runs faster than a lot of receivers that run 4.39. So he's fast, and that shows up as a punt returner. He's got a lot of agility, and that agility shows up as a route runner too. And he does a really good job kind of exploding out of his cut. So I've got a full scouting report up at The Athletic that describes his strengths and weaknesses, but he's just a small dude. Like, I think he's listed at 178, and he might be a little bit lighter. And that kind of reminds me of Alex Hollins, except he's 6'0", right? He's 6 feet tall. And Alexander Hollins is like 5'10", right? And so he looks even like thinner at points in the season than Hollins. And so that shows up on the field. Like, he can sometimes win against press coverage because he can do like the Stephon Diggs thing and get his shoulder underneath and not have to worry about contact. But when he does get contact, he gets bullied around in the field. His route running is more physical than it is technical. And so sometimes he doesn't do a great job kind of deceiving opponents. I mean, he's good on double moves, but other than that, and so, and he'll lose contested catches like left and right. Like, he's one of the worst contested catch receivers in the NFL over the past couple of years. So there's some problems here, right? He's not a starting receiver that the Vikings get to play at wide receiver 3. He's fit for a wide receiver 3 role, but it is good news for the Vikings. Hopefully this will encourage them to be in 11 personnel more often. Given how optimistic they are about Tyler Conklin, I don't know, maybe not, but this should make the Vikings offense more efficient. So it's generally a pretty good thing.
Has word come out yet about the contract?
Yeah, actually, I think, did Doogie tweet it out? I think Darren Wolfson tweeted out. Let me double check really quick. 1 year deal, $1.13 million. So is that vet minimum? No, he's not accrued enough time to get $1 million as veterans minimum, but it's a pretty cheap deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, 1 year deal, 1.1 million. So yeah, it's not a big contract. Oh, and one thing we should talk about is the injury. So he got injured, I believe, in October of last year, with an ACL injury. He says he's recovered enough. That's like one reason that he might not have signed at the beginning of free agency, is because teams didn't know about his health. Maybe, but he still signed like 2 days before training camp. So there's a lot of time between the two. But he suffered an ACL injury. He says he's at full health. The Vikings have not put him on the physically unable to perform list, so he might just be practicing from day one. As of this recording, maybe by the time morning rolls around, he'll be put on the PUP. But right now he's not on the PUP, so he might be able to practice from day one. But all of those physical skills that we talked about, he kind of relies on those skills more than a lot of receivers do in order for him to make things work. And we don't know if he's back to what he was or if he'll ever get back to what he was. That's just kind of how injury works. So that's an issue. And then he's also had persistent injuries. So when I say he was wide receiver 5 or 6 at the beginning of the 2020 season, that's not entirely because of talent-related reasons. It's not entirely because like Chris Conley is a better receiver than him. He also was suffering a bunch of injuries in camp that were persistent from 2019. So he's had persistent shoulder and neck issues for a while. And the shoulder issue kept him out of camp practices for a long time. So I think he started 2020 camp on the PUP, and only like late into training camp was able to make it. But that said, he wasn't on the injury report week 1, and he was a healthy scratch for the Jaguars anyway. So a lot of, vagaries here, right? Like a lot of uncertainty, but he has had injury issues throughout his career. And that's something to kind of keep in mind, is that, he's not kind of the most durable player.
And this is somebody that a lot of people had pointed to as a potential signing for the Vikings, and it was just nice to, finally get it done.
And it's nice that he's got a relationship with the wide receiver coach too, because Keenan McCardell was his wide receivers coach for 4 years in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I kind of want to do the meme.
The what?
The meme that got posted, because every offseason.
Oh my god! I'm not going to try and imitate the voice because if I naturally apparently have it, right?
Yes.
Every offseason, the Vikings sign a veteran wide receiver for cheap, and people get excited.
Well, did it work for those players?
No, it never does. I mean, these fans somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for D.D. Westbrook.
It's so dumb, and I can't unhear it.
Did it sound, because, when you hear yourself in there, does it sound similar?
The inflection at the end did sound similar, yes. You're just going to have to accept your...
No, it's not. No,
your Dave. I have long since accepted that I have the voice of the guy who does the Jack in the Box commercials. You're just going to have to accept that you... Like, the commercials where he's threatening Burger King and McDonald's and, like demanding phone calls from their CEOs and everything. It was brilliant stuff, but
it's just people have told me for a while now, because I've done this for so long, that I've got a pretty good voice for radio and podcasts. And now I have to ask if they've been lying to me this whole time, because I don't consider David, I love his work, but I don't consider him to have an elite radio voice or anything like that.
You're just going to have to accept. I have accepted the Jack in the Box voice. You can accept the fact that you have a bit of a similarity to David Cross's voice.
Well, the way you phrase that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable than sounds like David Cross.
Well, I'm also, trying not to upset the talent because we still have another hour and a half to go.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a tantrum and just quit in the middle of the podcast.
You were threatening to do so on Twitter the other day, so don't give me that crap. So
look, I've never done that on a podcast.
Okay, so the D.D. Westbrook thing happened. He's been signed, but as a result, the Vikings had to make some news, or make some moves rather. And Jalen Twyman ended up getting waived in a manner of speaking. Can you give us what happened? Because there were some people who were upset and didn't necessarily understand the full extent of what was happening.
Right. So Jalen Twyman is a non-football injury because he was the victim of a shooting as a bystander with 4 gunshot wounds. So that sounds pretty cold, right? Especially when his agent comes out and says, actually they were all superficial, which is just thank God, but also it's difficult to believe. 4 gunshot wounds? Wow. But yeah, he says that he should be ready to play. He's probably not going to be ready to play right away. You did have to come out of surgery, from what I remember. So he has to be put on the non-football injury list, and then will probably be non-football injury, reserved, right? And so as a result, the Vikings do have to waive him, because if another team wants to put him on their 53-man roster, the way the NFL rules are structured, they should have the right to do that if a team is not going to roster a player, which is essentially what the Vikings are doing. They'll retain the rights, obviously, and they'll continue paying Jalen Twyman whatever the NFI salary is, which is less than the injured reserve salary usually, although in a situation like this, you don't want the bad PR, so sometimes they'll just pay out the injured reserve salary. They have to put him through the waivers process to put him on NFI/reserved. I think if it's NFI to open camp, you don't have to, but this is to put him directly on the reserved list. So, so he was waived, which clears up a roster spot. That is the roster spot used for D.D. Westbrook. Some people, I think Dov Kleiman tweeted out without that context, and it was kind of rude, cruel, unnecessary. I don't know. It was not good to tweet it out without that context.
Yeah.
Because it just seems the Vikings were man, you got a shot. I don't know about that. Bye.
Yeah. And considering this was a player that was drafted in the 6th round, I believe, and the fact that this is something that is expected to go back to the Vikings, it's almost like it's an unspoken rule amongst the other teams that they're not going to touch him unless they want to, be asses. So
yeah, and the thing is, you have to put him on the roster. You can't put him on injured, which I guess other teams can't put him on injured reserve from training camp. But that's the thing. So there's an unspoken rule that you just kind of generally don't do that. Which the Patriots, unsurprisingly, have violated this unspoken rule, because I think that's how they acquired. What's his name? David Hogan.
Chris Hogan.
Chris Hogan. That's it. I think that's how they acquired Chris Hogan. The Buffalo Bills waived him with an injury designation, or maybe this is how they acquired Jake Paquette or something. But they did this, where somebody was waived through the injury process, and then the Patriots just put him on the roster and didn't put him on injured reserve, because you can just do that. And that was from a camp cut. So they were waived with an injury designation off of the camp cuts to get down to 53. And the Patriots grabbed that guy, cut somebody else, and put this player, which is either Chris Hogan or Luke Paquette or somebody, onto their roster. And everyone was like, man, I can't believe you did that. That violates the unspoken rule that we all kind of just agreed to without anyone saying that they agreed to it.
And so Belichick just snarls in the background, and that's the end of that.
And he's like, well, there's no rule against it. And I do stuff that there are rules against. You think I don't care about this? Come on.
Exactly. Other news that came out included a Michael Pierce injury. And I know how happy you were about the signing of another nose tackle, but Michael Pierce is expected to start week 1, correct?
Yeah, so he'll be injured at the beginning of camp, probably be on the PUP list. Minor calf injury while working out. I don't know if this will be classified as a non-football injury, but because you could be doing stuff outside the facility and I could just be called an NFI. But he should be available at some point in the middle of camp. The problem is the Vikings have lost a lot of trust in this regard, right? When they say we expect him to play by week, and I never trust an agent, right? If an agent's just he'll be fine, he'll be able to play by week 1. You're yeah, I mean, you're probably right, but you're motivated not to be. So, who knows, right? If an agent lies enough, or lies by a big enough amount, it looks pretty bad. Oh yeah, he'll be fine to play by week 1, and it turns out he's going into surgery, he's going to be an injured reserve the whole time. Well, that's not the magnitude of lie that they'll have. Right?
And considering last year's tweak.
Right, yeah, injury. And that's what I mean from the Vikings perspective, right? So that's how the Vikings have kind of lost a lot of trust on this one, is because when they described the Danielle Hunter tweak, now we just kind of don't know, right? If it really is fairly minor, and we just can't take the Vikings at their word on this anymore, which is something I feel like they should have considered. I don't know. This is it's interesting because Michael Zimmer has lied to the media before, but sometimes has apologized for that. I think this was what the Terrence Newman at safety thing. And the thing is, whenever we're upset about that, it's not I can't believe you would lie to us. It's more I can't believe that you would present yourself as a straight shooter, right? Who's always kind of honest and then lie to us, right? If you lie to us, we've had coaches lie to us before, right? Maybe not Leslie Frazier, but Brad Childress, right? We've had coaches lie to us before. Teams have, people covering teams have had those coaches lie to them before. But we understand that, right? And so we'll say, they told us this, but whatever, right? Whereas, because you've been presented as a straight shooter, we'll take it at your word, and then you do it. And now we look kind of untrustworthy to our readers or whoever, our listeners or whatever. That kind of sucks. Also, when we report what you say, that context of whether you've lied to us before is part of that reporting, either explicitly or implicitly. And so now, when we talk about the Michael Pierce injury, it's nice to have the agent say it too, because now you've got a couple of sources, both motivated, right? But a couple of sources, right? But yeah, now we'll just say, yeah, maybe he'll start by week 1. I don't know anymore. So now whenever you communicate stuff to us about a player, you won't be able to get the communication you want across. Whatever purpose that you have to communicate information about a player, now we won't communicate it the way that you want us to. And so whatever value that is to you, maybe it's none, right? But whatever value that is to you, now it's been diminished by that. So, but if it's none, obviously you're comfortable with that, but that's just kind of how it is now. And so you probably can't get mad at us, or you shouldn't have the moral right or whatever to get mad at us when we question this. So, Now I don't know, right? Like it's probable, right? Most of the time when this happens, it's fairly probable that it's pretty minor. Like when Taylor Heineke put his foot through a door, we all were kind of understood, like, yeah, it's probably the end of a season. So like usually if it's a season-ending injury, we'll know. And so it's probably the case that he'll be fine. But it's something to keep in mind. And then also remember that Michael Pierce has an injury history. And so like when he showed up to 2019 Ravens camp, he showed up significantly over the weight target that the Ravens set for him, or that they agreed to. I want to say he was like 60 pounds over their weight target or something like that. Maybe he was 45 pounds, but he was significantly over their weight target. And so for his safety, they say, and probably that's true, for his safety, they decided not to have him start that year in camp. And so he was just not practicing for a while. And so eventually by the time the season started, he started playing, and then he had a couple of injuries throughout the course of the season. And they were all kind of lower body injuries. So if he's got this injury history, that's something that we have to consider too, is that, maybe he won't be able to play 300, 400 snaps like you might expect a nose tackle to over the course of the season. So yeah, the Vikings have another nose tackle. I don't know if a backup nose tackle is worth $12 million, but they've got another nose tackle. And hey, you can play Sheldon at the 3. You've got a starting quality 3 technique. So the quality drop off there is not very significant.
So the other player Vikings news involves Jeff Gladney, whose grand jury date is July 29th. There's not really a ton to say on this, especially considering what he's been accused of. But the grand jury is scheduled for July 29th for whether or not he will be formally indicted on his felony charges.
Yeah, and if the prosecution wants to indict him, he'll be indicted. I mean, that's just kind of how grand juries work. But that'll tell us a little bit about whether or not, a settlement is in the offing or something like that. So I guess technically it's not a settlement because it's a criminal proceeding. But, players have found ways to have witnesses. I shouldn't say it like that. I should say sometimes witnesses decide not to move forward. How about that?
And the other thing that's worth mentioning is nothing official has come down from the NFL as to whether or not he ends up on the commissioner's exempt list or something. But to me, this still screams, even if this was to be dropped and settled and everything, that this still screams exempt list for a bit.
Yeah, and the NFL has said for a while now that they do not require a guilty verdict in order to, or even technically a charge, although they usually wait until at least a charge, which of course he's been charged, he's about to be indicted. But usually if a player is charged, they'll either be suspended or put on the exempt list. And so the NFL will determine to the best of their ability using their own investigation whether or not they think it's more likely than not, according to them. Yeah. Which is the standard in civil cases. So, versus criminal cases beyond a reasonable doubt. So I would imagine that Jeff Gladney will either just be suspended, which actually that might just happen without the exempt list stuff. It will either be suspended as a result, or he'll be put on the exempt list. But I think the reason the NFL has not announced a suspension is because this hasn't concluded, right? Because the suspension will probably be quite a bit more if he's found guilty, even if he's found guilty of a deprecated charge or a plea deal or something like that. So yeah, that's always a possibility. But yeah, so watch out for that. July 29th, we'll probably hear about what the grand jury decides, whether or not they decide to move forward with the criminal proceeding. And that'll give us kind of more clarity in terms of the roster situation. So there's that. But yeah, not much more to add. I do want to say it was Brian Murphy, who's now working with Purple Insider, so that's with Matthew Collar and Sam Ekstrom, who I believe first reported this.
Yep. So that is something to you'll likely be hearing news about that coming up here shortly. But just wanted to mention that really was the only news that happened last week up until Friday. So just we're not doing a 2-minute show based on a grand jury date selection. So yeah, we're not doing that. But then Friday happened, and the Vikings are trailblazers, as they have the first coach, offensive line coach in this case, who is not technically fired, but is out as he's out. Rick Dennison is out as the offensive line / run game coordinator after he refused the COVID-19 vaccine. Minnesota, this is in a report from Courtney Cronin, or rather a tweet. Minnesota will promote assistant offensive line coach Phil Rauscher to replace Dennison, and they hired Auburn special teams analyst Ben Steele as an assistant.
Yeah, so I think Courtney worded her tweet very specifically, and I'm happy that I noticed that, because I never referred to him as fired, either in kind of the new stuff that I helped the athletic workshop or in like subsequent tweets. Because if he was no longer employed by the Vikings, which it turns out he still is, we don't know if he mutually agreed to part ways or if he resigned or what. He's just out, right? The second, out is very like broad, right? Like he's not out of the organization necessarily, but he's out in terms of his coaching responsibilities, at least in the short term. So what's happening here is not directly that someone is being fired, if he was fired, which he's not, which we'll talk about that in a second, is not that he has lost his position in some way directly because he's refused the COVID-19 vaccine, which the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has ruled is something that employers can do if it is within kind of the bounds of their required duties, which in this case it would be because he has to directly interact with people. But because it is untenable for a coach in a competitive environment anyway, for a coach to not be able to have direct contact with players. So he can no longer be considered a tier 1 employee. So there's tier 1 and tier 2. And tier 1 employees by NFL rule have to be vaccinated, which is a rule that will and does stand up to EEOC guidelines. So that means that if you're a tier 1 person, that you can go through the building without, I believe without masks, but without like those bracelets on. You can access all parts of the building, and you could directly interact with players on the field, and you can have those meetings in the meeting rooms directly, physically. Now, mind you, so was it Alexander Madison tweeted out, his displeasure with this, and that, they were doing it remotely last year and there was no problem with that, which, I mean, like, there were a lot of problems with the Vikings offensive line last year. Maybe coaching had something to do with it. I don't know. So I don't know if I would have gone that far. But B, you were competing against 31 other teams going through the same restrictions, right? Now you're not. Now those other teams potentially, and I would argue almost certainly, will have access to better coaching because their coaches can physically interact with players. Like I would imagine just virtual coaching is like not good for coaching, right? I think every coach would agree with that. And so with that in mind, because he can't be a tier 1 person, he can't perform his coaching duties. And so he's no longer a coach. So my opinions on whether or not this is something, that's morally correct aside, and despite my political inclinations, I do have some reservations about, medicalization in employers. This is all within the bounds of both NFL rules and NFL law. And also, like, it just kind of makes sense. You're in a competitive environment and he can't interact with the players where 31 other teams or 30 other teams or whatever do have coaches that can interact directly with the other players. So I don't think you can't be a coach, right, by NFL rule anyway, without having the vaccine. I think that they would allow you to do meetings remotely. I think that they would allow you to do coaching on one of those great little Segway tablets or whatever. But, I think that they would, that's allowable, but I don't think any team wants to be in that situation. I think also Patriots assistant offensive line coach is in the same situation. So since then, the Vikings released a statement. The Vikings continue to hold discussions with offensive line coach Rick Dennison regarding the NFL, NFLPA COVID-19 protocols for training camp and preseason games. At this time, Coach Dennison does not have an exemption to the vaccination requirements of those protocols. We will adhere to the requirements of the protocols and of applicable law. Which that brings up something interesting as well. If he's seeking an exemption, and you can seek an exemption to the protocols according to NFL policy for religious or medical reasons, and maybe some other reasons, I don't know. But the NFL policy specifies religious and medical reasons. So if he can demonstrate that there's a medical reason for him not to get the vaccine, which would not include information like the vaccine doesn't work or whatever, but rather a medical condition that he has that would prevent him from getting the vaccination, which I don't want to make light of. That's certainly something that could be a possibility, and it's true for a lot of people, that would give him an exemption. I'm surprised if that was the case. If he ends up receiving a medical exemption, I'd be surprised that he hadn't applied for this earlier. It's something that you'd want to have available to you as, a coach of a team that's about to hit training camp well before training camp. So there's that. And then there's a religious exemption, which I don't know what the NFL standards are for that. But generally speaking, those are actually like a lot more difficult than people seem to think they are. Like, you can't just say, my religion says I can't get a vaccine. And honestly, it's actually fairly difficult, even if like your pastor says, hey, our religion says that, he can't get the vaccination because, and again, I'm not an expert on all of this, right? So I could be wrong. But like, if you've had other kinds of vaccinations, which like basically everybody in the United States that's gone through a public school system or a major university has, measles, mumps, rubella, whatever, it would be tough to say that your anti-vaccination stance in this instance is supported by scripture or something, right? So that's tough, right? But it is possible. I'm just kind of surprised, like, if he is seeking an exemption, why he hasn't sought one before. Maybe he's in the appeals process. Either way, this is a fairly late moment in time to get all of this done, unless it's like an onerously long process, in which case it's on the NFL. It should not take this long, but this is very weird for a lot of reasons. So
could it actually be related to the new NFL rules that were put out by the league? Like, could it be directly related, like, as these things are coming out?
So there are new rules regarding training camp, but the Tier 1 stuff has been out for a while. Like, early in the summer, they designated what Tier 1 and Tier 2 would be, and that they designated that Tier 1 would require vaccinations, right? So that it could be, right? Like, I don't want to say anything that's not the case, but like, it could be. I don't know. But it does feel a little bit late, but maybe he is seeking an exemption. So we'll see about that. Also, so his agent also released a statement. Rick is 100% committed to and invested in being the best football coach he can be for the Vikings, with a singular focus of winning the Super Bowl this year. So both of these indicate that he's not been fired by the Vikings, but he is not taking up the responsibilities of an offensive line coach at the moment. The fact that the Vikings hired another person to be an assistant offensive line coach is an indication. Maybe it's not a strong one. It might be. Maybe it's not a strong one. An indication that they don't have an expectation that Dennison will be there soon, right? Or they just wanted to move quickly in case Auburn's special teams analyst was going to get hired soon. I don't know. So yeah, I wanted to handle this with like a little bit of sensitivity because, I don't want to make the environment about this issue more poisonous than it already is. But yeah, that's the whole of it. Now, you did mention new COVID rules. This is probably a good time to like kind of transition into that.
I was going to say, while you're tiptoeing a line here, let me throw some flaming stuff at you so you can juggle. Yeah, and let's talk about the new COVID stuff, because there was at least one big thing that came out of it, which on paper sounds bad, but it didn't happen last year. And that was the question of whether or not a team, you could almost call it the Titans rule, or the Titan rule, right, as to if a team is not able to play the game after, like, if you can't reschedule it, we're not going to a week 19 here. It has to happen. And if it can't, then the team who is responsible for it forfeits and ends up having to pay a bunch of fines.
Yeah. So, okay, God. So Tom Pelissero tweeted these out first. The rules are like nuts to me. And I was actually really upset at the discourse online about it, which I got into a bit of a fight with Eric Eager about it, which, normally we're pretty friendly on Twitter. Which, whatever, right? But we've since made up since I retweeted his Carson Wentz take. That's always a good way to make up with me, right? But there's been a bunch of rules. The most prominent rule of which is that if, like you said, if there's a forfeit, so if a game cannot be scheduled as a result of an outbreak among unvaccinated players, and that's important because, of course, you can still test positive for COVID-19 if you've been vaccinated, probably because you've caught the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? So, and I'll talk about that in a second too. But they will attempt, obviously, to reschedule the game, but there will not be week 19, like you said. If they can't reschedule the game, then that is marked down as a forfeit for the team that had the outbreak among unvaccinated players. So they get a loss in their win-loss record, right? Which will affect seeding and obviously whether or not they make the playoffs. It will affect the draft, etc. The other thing is that nobody gets paid. So if you're on the team that did not have the outbreak, you don't get your game check, right? If you're a player for that team, which not only makes the value of roster bonuses way better, right? Because like if you restructured this offseason as a player and converted your base salary into a roster bonus, boy, are you happy that you did that, right? Because it's no longer a game check. It's guaranteed. Some people were talking about how this was like some sort of social enforcement mechanism, which I would understand if you were on the same team as somebody. I actually really hate this. Like from the NFL's perspective, I guess I kind of understand it because they're not making money on the game. So how are they going to be able to pay players? But since I already believe the NFL underpays its players, which I'm not going to get into now, but like substantially, that's what the product of a weak union is going to do. I think that they could afford to pay somebody for a forfeited game or even like a week's worth of forfeited games without really suffering too much from profitability or anything like that. So this really sucks for those players, especially because you wouldn't have to pay like half of those players anyway. Anyway, this really sucks for those players. So that's the most prominent, well-recognized rule from all of that. There are other rules, like, for example, you only have to get tested every 14 days if you're vaccinated, but you have to get tested, a point of entry test, every day if you're unvaccinated. If you have a positive test, either through this system or not, the same rules apply to you as last year in terms of your ability to return to the team if you're unvaccinated. So, which I believe is if you never show if you're completely asymptomatic, it's 10 days. And then 2 consecutive negative tests within 24 hours, and no positive test in that period. So if you took like 3 tests and 2 of them were negative, the positive would still. I don't know why you take 3 tests unless you wanted to game the system, but there you go. If you're vaccinated and asymptomatic, then you can return after 2 negative tests that are 24 hours apart, like as soon as you no longer test positive, right? Twice. And you're not subject to quarantine as a result of close contact with an infected person. You just have to test positive. Whereas an unvaccinated person, if they have it's the same rule as last year. So if they make contact with a person, they'll have a 5-day quarantine period. But yeah, and if you're symptomatic, I think if you're vaccinated, it's as soon as you're asymptomatic and test negative twice. If you're unvaccinated, same thing. You have to wait until you're asymptomatic, and then you have to wait 10 days beyond that. So that's a pretty significant. It's the same kind of as last year, but because of the competitive nature of the NFL and you're competing against players that don't have to do that, that's a pretty significant issue for a player. There's I don't believe that there's an emergency game day practice squad activation rule like there was last year, but instead you get this year, and this is just kind of negotiated by the CBA anyway, so it's kind of independent of COVID. You can bring up 2 practice squad players to your roster to be 54 and 55. So you don't really have to do the same kind of juggling on game day for practice squad activation. There's a couple of other rules. I'll link Tom's tweet, but that's important. And then NFL training camp, and kind of the rules are kind of a mix of last year's rules and the year before. Fans that are there can't seek autographs, and they have to be, I think, like 20 feet away from players, just kind of like a lot in an open air environment, especially. But they have to be far away from players. There's going to be contact tracing and all that as per normal. If there's anybody in the area that's known to have been to test positive and stuff like that. One thing I want to add, though, is you will hear about a lot of players that will have tested positive for COVID-19 that are vaccinated. And it's not because of any remnant of the vaccine tripping, as far as I know, tripping up the testing procedure. It's because you could still get COVID-19 while you're vaccinated. And the reason you'll hear about it a lot is because the league is trending towards having at least 90% of their players vaccinated by the time the season starts. And I believe they may even be close to 90% have at least taken one dose of a 2-dose vaccine or are in the process of finishing up their vaccination or are in the 10-day period after the second vaccination. So that's what that 90% comprises. I believe they're close to that, and they should probably just hit 90% by the time the season starts. So if you take a look at those numbers, let's say there are 3,000 players in the NFL. So if you take a look at, and 10% of them are unvaccinated and 90% of them are vaccinated. If all 3,000 players are exposed to COVID-19, right? And the transmission rate, and I'm making up these numbers in my head, I don't know for sure, but if the transmission rate for an unvaccinated player for having contact with somebody with COVID-19 is 50%, right? If it's that high, and the transmission rate for an unvaccinated player is 5%, so if it's a tenth, right? 135 players that are vaccinated will test positive, and 150 players that are unvaccinated will test positive. That means that the rate at which you acquire the disease is much higher for an unvaccinated player. But because so many players are vaccinated, it will look like it's 50-50 or thereabouts. Because even though your chances are much lower of acquiring it once you make contact, you will still have a small possibility, and then the law of large numbers, essentially, or having a large number of people with a small percentage is going to look very similar. So there's that. And then I'll also just take this opportunity to say that, like, the evidence that we have suggests that even if you get COVID-19 and you have the vaccine, you're just far less likely to experience severe symptoms, and you're far less likely to die. Like, the vast proportion of people who've died of COVID-19 in the United States in the past couple of weeks, the vast proportion have been unvaccinated, even though there are still a large number of people who are acquiring the disease after being vaccinated. So I'll add all of that in there. I imagine most people who listen to this podcast are very used to me talking about this with my particular angle. So I don't imagine this is a surprise for most people, but I'm just throwing that in there.
Yeah. So this is, he has not technically been fired, but this is what they're doing at the moment. So hopefully this gets resolved at some point, and whether he ends up being a part of the team or if agents are breaking down doors and trying to vaccinate people, which is what the athletic comment would imply. We'll see. But let's take a look at one of the funnier stories over this off season. And it's kind of ended on a bit of a sad note. Aaron Rodgers appears to be returning to Green Bay. It's sad because it was so much fun to hold over the heads of Packer faithful. And if the stories are true, and this is his last year in Green Bay, we at least finally have a date as to when he may potentially be out of the division for a rival, playing for a rival anyway. So let's talk about Aaron Rodgers, his return, and how he desperately wants Randall Cobb.
Yeah, I guess. Of all the... Yeah, man, sure. That's like...
See, that's my favorite...
If you're the Packers, you're like, yeah, I'll trade like a 7th round pick to make you happy.
They're trading a former Bears wide receiver to the Texans, it sounded like, actually. Like, that sounds that sounds like the trade bait. Meanwhile, if you're Chicago or Detroit, can you please just throw a 1st round at the Texans and make this so that it doesn't happen? Like, can somebody throw a 1st rounder next year?
Yeah, just to not. Yeah, well, if I'm the Lions, I'll try to outbid the Packers for Randall Cobb.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
that's so funny.
Like, the Vikings aren't going to do it because the Vikings could potentially be in the market for Aaron Rodgers next year. But, like, after that, anybody else in the division, please, Lions, Bears, do us a solid. Tigers. You're in this division too. throw a first rounder or something. Throw a couple of players that you who you aren't going to miss down to the Texans.
You're not lacking for those kinds of players.
Chicago Bears, send three of your tight ends.
Look, the Houston Texans, technically Deshaun Watson reported to camp. We don't know if he'll be able to play this season. Now there have been more reports filed to the police. Who knows, right? Trade Nick Foles to the Bears. They can't be happy with Tyrod Taylor. I think they've got Tyrod Taylor. They can't be happy with Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills.
Send Nick Foles down to the Texans.
Get Randall Cobb back. And it's Nick Foles, right? Like, you could get something else.
Heads up, that's okay. But you could totally convince them to trade like half their offensive line for this too.
Plus you need a receiver. Right? You just traded away Anthony Miller. So you could use a Randall Cobb.
We need some team to mess this up badly. Please.
It'd be so funny. So the Packers and Aaron Rodgers have agreed to a couple of things. So his 2023 is now a void year, and he cannot be tagged. That's part of the agreement that they're going to make or have already made. In addition to that, the contract will be adjusted probably through the same mechanism that's going to void the 2023 year, so that the Packers will have more cap room this year. So they're probably just going to push money into the void year and change what's guaranteed and what's not, and what's a game day check and what's not, to increase the amount of cap room. They're probably also going to push money to 2022, which is important, and I'll get to that in a second. They try to acquire Randall Cobb, and the Packers agree to review Rodgers' situation at the end of the season. I don't know why that's like part of the agreement. Like, Rodgers will just force that issue anyway, but sure, fine. Packers will agree to review it, and quote unquote mechanisms will be put in place to address Rodgers' issues with the team. I don't know what those mechanisms are. It's unlikely that they'll give him veto power over like their draft board or something like I don't know, right? But maybe he's guaranteed to have he gets to be part of the Zoom calls, or he gets to be in the physical room or whatever, right? As they make some of these decisions. I don't know if you saw I forgot who the interview was with. It wasn't Peter Schrager. But he listed off 3 receivers that he liked heading into this was before it was after the draft, but it was before they played. 3 receivers that he liked. Was it Andrew Brandt that got him to talk? Might have been. That Andrew Brandt was talking to him, and he was talking, and Rodgers opened up a lot. He was kind of stung by the Jordan Love thing, and he went and he got some tequila. And he's talking to Brandt, and he mentions the receivers that I really like. So they traded up for Jordan Love. So that really bothered me, is the fact that they traded up for him. But there were 3 receivers that I liked: the kid from LSU, which of course is Justin Jefferson, the Arizona State guy, which is Brandon Ayuk, and then there was a 3rd receiver. Oh yeah, the Clemson guy, T. Higgins. All 3 of those receivers had really good years, right? And again, this is before we knew what years they would have. So he named essentially 3 receivers that he liked. All 3 of those were really great receivers, right? Like Ayuk, it was the best yards after catch receiver, maybe in the NFL, period, last year. And Justin Jefferson had more yards than anyone else in the NFL last year. I guess he's not a top 10 receiver according to Ben, but he's up there, right? He's really great. And T. Higgins had just a really remarkable rookie year as well. I put him above Chase Claypool.
And the Packers were rumored to be taking a wide receiver in the 1st round that year.
Right.
And even to the point where Aaron Rodgers was on the Pat McAfee show famously before the draft and said it'd be nice if we were able to pick up a position player, because we haven't done that in however long. They haven't picked up a wide receiver in years.
Right. So, and they don't have to spend a 1st round pick on a guy to make him happy. If they'd spend a 2nd and a 3rd on skill position, or especially on receivers, they got enough running backs, right? If they'd spent a 2nd and a 3rd on receivers, I think he'd be okay that they didn't spend a 1st, right? Maybe the fact that they got a quarterback with a 1st, that's still its own issue. But yeah. Anyway, so I don't know what mechanisms we put in place, but the fact that he kind of nailed 3 of those receivers, and it was a great year for receivers, so it was easier to nail them. But if you picked 3 random receivers that were drafted in the first 2 rounds last year, odds are one of them wasn't going to have a great year. It could have been Henry Ruggs or Jalen Reagor or whatever. But like just the way that numbers work, if you were to name 3 at random that were drafted in the first 2 rounds, you probably would not have hit on all 3. And he hit on all 3, so that's kind of interesting. Second, so I don't know what those mechanisms will look like. Secondly, apparently he will have the freedom to decide where he wants to play in 2022. If, it doesn't work out. Obviously, like, the other team has to provide some trade capital, which, like, another fight that I want to have with a member from Pro Football Focus. But PFF Moo was like Timo Risk, whose work I really love and I've used a lot in my articles. But, he tweeted out, the Eagles have 3 firsts next year, which I didn't even know that. That's incredible. But, like, why would Aaron Rodgers want to go to the Eagles? It's like one of the least interesting teams he could possibly go to. There's no way he'd want to go to the Eagles. And Timo points out, like, well, it's not like he has complete freedom about where to go. They have to be able to pay for him. And it's like, yeah, but you're treating it like the ability to pay for him is it's like 2 things are required here. They have to have the ability to play for him, and he wants to play, right? Those 2 things are required, and you're treating one as like the necessary and sufficient condition. That's kind of weird. But yeah, so he gets to decide where he wants to play, obviously out of people that have the ability to pay. So they both have to absorb his cap hit, which this is where it comes up again, that maybe his 2022 cap hit's going to be larger now because of this agreement, because that's how you'd probably be able to free up a little bit of cap room and still guarantee him a fair amount of money. So that's they have to have cap room and they have to have trade capital, whether that's first round picks, which is probably what I'd go for if I were them, or if it's a high level player of some sort. So multiple first round picks is probably the best because they can stockpile that for a quarterback if Jordan Love doesn't work out. But whatever, maybe the 49ers throw Brandon Ayuk into the mix. Actually, it would really suck if he picked a team and then that team, in order to get him, traded away the stuff that he liked about that team. So
that's kind of how quarterback, like high level quarterback trades end up happening too. So it's very
a lot of the time. So if they trade away like some defensive players, he might be like, yeah, I'll figure it out there. But yeah, that's the tough part. It is only going to be a trade for like 1 year of a player's deal, so it shouldn't approach the compensation that you'd expect for a quarterback trade, but it's something. So yeah, that throws all of my like predictions out the window that I've like actually published, which sucks because all my published predictions are relied on the assumption that Aaron Rodgers wouldn't play, and I was definitely wrong about this because people have asked me both on this pod and then elsewhere if I think Rodgers will play for the Packers this year, and I thought no. So there's that.
Well, I win a bet with Dusty, and that's all I care about.
Fair enough.
I've never seen anybody so absolutely positive that somebody was going to end up playing for the Broncos and didn't. So like,
did he think specifically the Broncos?
That was I think we talked about it like last episode. It's like Dusty and I, when I saw him last.
Oh yeah, we like the odds were just nuts because it's like he chose a specific team. I mean, the team he lives next to, but still a specific team.
He's just pounding his fist on the bar. He's gonna play for the Broncos this year. I got money on it to you, and I was like, all right, I'll take it. It's like I'll he's gonna be starting in Green Bay, but I'll take the field on this one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we did talk about this.
Like if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. So before we hit the mailbag, I want to talk about potential like players who are on the bubble or bubble battle sort of thing. You've had a lot of posts on The Athletic over the last month or so about potential battles and everything. So who are the bubble players that we are looking at as training camp is about to open?
In terms of like bubble to make the team outright, I think at receiver, you could see somebody like Chad Beebe gone as a result of the D.D. Westbrook signing. But yeah, aside from that, like KJ Osborne, is competing with like Amir Smith-Marset. That's going to be important. I think obviously kind of the people below them are more likely to not be on the team, so I wouldn't qualify them as bubble. So that's something to keep in mind. On the offensive line, Drew Samia like strikes me as the most on the bubble player. He could be the 10th offensive lineman or not. Maybe he even loses a job to someone like Kyle Hinton, but that's something to keep in mind. Zach Davidson, even though he's a 5th round rookie, I think is on the bubble because I think there's a good chance that Brandon Dillon beats him out. I just put that in our 53-man roster that's going to be published on Tuesday morning with me and Chad Graff. And actually, me and Chad actually agreed on that. So that's kind of curious because he's 5th round rookie. He's more likely to make the team than not, generally speaking. But I just think he's probably not ready to play tight end. between Jake Browning and Nate Stanley, I think Browning is not a lock to make the team, but he's almost certainly going to. Then obviously Kellen Mond will, so Stanley's going to be out probably. So I don't know if there's any bubble player there. At running back, I don't know if Kenan Nwangu is going to be ready to play running back. So I think that they really want Amir Abdullah, but he's on the bubble, as it were. So if Nwangu looks good enough in preseason, then Amir Abdullah really has to fight and assert for his job. So there's that. On defense, yeah, I mean, Jalen Holmes is on the outside looking in. You know, that's somebody that's on the bubble. I think that James Lynch and Hercules Mataafa are also defensive linemen that could be on the outside or on the inside. It's really tough to make that decision there. At linebacker, there's basically everybody but Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr. Like, I could see any combination of players, except I think the third-round pick, Chaz Surratt's going to make the team. But I could see any other combination of players making or not making the team. You could see Cameron Smith gone, which would be really unfortunate because, you know, he's coming back from heart surgery. Troy Dye didn't have a great year. Ryan Connolly was starting a lot, but he's physically limited. Blake Lynch, Christian Ellis, Nick Vigil even. They signed him to like $1 million contract. They're all on the bubble, essentially. At cornerback, Chris Boyd is the most bubble player to me there. Maybe he makes it, maybe he doesn't. There's a lot of really good candidates, but after that first four, and then after Harrison Handers looks so good, it's really tough to make a case for anybody besides Chris Boyd. So he'd have to make it as a sixth guy. And then at safety, maybe Josh Metellus. I don't know. So yeah, those are the bubble players. Special teams is all but decided now that Riley Patterson's on the puck.
Well, let's start off with the mailbag. And let's start off with the HIPAA stuff. Kirk asks, for a Reefs HIPAA corner, is Eric Sugarman considered a, quote, covered entity as a healthcare provider?
So this one's kind of complicated. I've got a Deadspin article linked, which I don't really love the new direction Deadspin's taken, but this article is pretty good because they talk to a healthcare lawyer or a specialist in this regard. So the team physician is not usually covered by HIPAA as it relates to the team because athletes sign in. So he is a healthcare provider, right? So I believe he is not necessarily authorized to tell us about medical conditions. And he's actually been very good about that. It's very frustrating. Unless like he gets consent from the player. But in contracts, players agree for the flow of information from the healthcare provider to the team. And then the team is not covered. So the employer is not covered by HIPAA. And if they were covered by HIPAA, it's likely that the contract language, the standard contract language, would change to allow consent for that information to be disseminated to the public at large. So from my understanding, I could be wrong. I'll link the article. From my understanding, because pro sports teams are not covered entities, and because players agree that the medical information provided by the trainer, or I believe anybody, I think that's in the contract, but the medical information provided by the trainer, they consent to that information being given to the team. It's just a required part of the contract. And the team is not covered by HIPAA. They can just, there doesn't have to be an additional clause saying that the team is allowed to release it. So yeah, and then obviously the insurance company is also covered by HIPAA, but that doesn't enter into this particular equation here. So yeah, they agree to share health information with their employer. The employer is not covered by the current law, the one, signed into law until like 1996. So yeah, should they be is another question, but is Eric Sugarman specifically? I believe he is. So he probably can't tell us anything directly, but he can tell the team and the team can tell us.
And of course, when players are taking the podium and talking during press conferences and declaring that everything is a HIPAA violation.
Oh yeah, that doesn't factor into, like, it's so weird, right? So like if I asked you, like, hey James, what's your vaccination status? You could just like not tell me, right? Like you could just be like, I don't want to tell you, right? Or if I'm like, hey man, do you have cancer? You could just be like, weird question, but no, I'm not going to tell you. I don't have to tell you. I don't feel like telling you, right? That's just like that's part of the conversation. If I ask you how much money you make, you're like, I don't really want to tell you, right? Or like how your kid's doing, I don't really feel comfortable talking about my kid, right? Like that's just like a part of conversation. You just set a boundary.
You can Jay Cutler the situation easy.
Right, yeah, like, yeah, you could just stonewall. You could just be like, yeah, I don't really feel like telling you. So like, you don't have to cite a law saying I don't have to tell you, random stranger, that I have no like legal or like employment related relationship with. Like, you just could just not tell them, right? There's not. And so it was kind of, I mean, not like I expect Dak Prescott to be like an expert on like medical privacy laws or anything like that, but it was kind of weird, right? Also, like, so if I ask a doctor, hey, how's Dak Prescott's ankle? The doctor could say, I don't want to tell you, and we'll be fine, right? Or the doctor could say, hey, I want to tell you, but if I told you, it would violate HIPAA laws. That's also true, right? But like the player can just give up whatever medical information they want. Like, providing vaccination status is not any different, medically speaking, than like someone asking you if you're like pregnant and you saying yes or no, right? Or if you come into work bald one day, an insensitive coworker might just ask, hey man, you have cancer? Which, you know, that's rough, but like, you know, and you could just say yes or no, right? That's not any different, right? People ask people medical questions all the time, and no one says, well, that's a HIPAA violation for you asking me that. But yeah, and then it's kind of morphed into people. It's exactly that. It's kind of morphed into people saying, well, it's illegal for you to ask that, which is like, there's not a lot of stuff that it's illegal for you to like ask as a stranger, right? Like in an interview, there's a bunch of stuff that's illegal to ask. But like stranger to stranger or friend to friend or whatever, when there's not like a kind of a legally established relationship that is like defined in the law in some other particular way, there's not a lot of stuff that's like illegal to ask. So it is kind of funny. But yeah, that's not what HIPAA is. HIPAA is in regards to the medical information provided between doctors and insurance companies. And I believe I'm not a medical privacy expert, but I believe when you go to the doctor, you do have to sign something that allows the doctor to release that medical information into the medical database. So like, it's pretty strict.
And to your insurance as well. So, you know, the thing that struck me as you were saying, I'm not a medical privacy expert here, is that no one who has been in front of a microphone for the NFL that has been saying things like that's a HIPAA violation or I'm not telling you because of HIPAA is an expert in any of these things. Just wanted to point that out. Just thought that was cute. Sean asks, is there any situation where the Vikings should look at Deshaun Watson as an option?
I mean, any situation? Yeah.
Like, how cheap? Not three first round cheap. How cheap?
For me, the situation is, you know, if not only everybody recants their story, but it turns out we've got evidence that somebody was attempting to manipulate these women into you know, creating a false scenario in the first. Like, I would have to have a positive reason that he didn't do anything for me to be comfortable with it. And then, of course, aside from that situation, if like he's a 7th round pick and we're in this particular spot where, you know, technically we don't know, I mean, I could see it, but I still actually would not be comfortable with it. So, my answer is it would require an extraordinary amount of evidence to indicate that he probably did not do what he's accused of. And given that more women have gone to the police now and are outside of the civil suit, which, like, I mean, to me, that's maybe a sign that a settlement is coming. I don't know. But now that, like, I believe at least 10 women, as of at least this morning, the morning of this recording, which is on Monday, have gone to the police, it seems pretty unlikely to me that this is all made up. So, yeah, there is a situation. That situation seems like a less than 1% possibility, though.
Yeah, it would take a full-on conspiracy at this point.
Which I don't think is impossible. It's just unlikely.
Yeah. Luke Braun asks, you must switch 2 Vikings from offense to defense, and they must assume each other's positions. So like a pure swap. Example, Thielen plays safety, Harrison plays wide receiver. Who do you pick?
Yeah, so we have to make this question interesting, we have to add the specification that we should expect them to start this season, right? So I can't just be like, actually, let's put Dan Chisna at safety, and we'll put Perry Nickerson at wide receiver. And then they both get cut. And you're like, yeah, well, it's great. No impact on the team. That's boring. So let's figure out who among our expected starters we'd want to switch the other side of the ball. So there's 2 approaches here, right? One is, how good do I think that person will be at that other position? and the other one is to minimize damage, right? Like, I don't really think that we're going to get a lot out of this guy, so we might as well switch positions, right? And they have to start for the position that they're playing to, right? So you're going to get damage, right? So I think I don't want to move Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen, I guess, is a possibility. I'm going to ignore CJ Ham for now, even though in a 2 wide receiver system, I guess he'd be the starter. Maybe Tyler Conklin's the starter, but somebody suggested Dalvin Cook, and I think that's the best answers. I'd move Dalvin Cook to, I guess, maybe cornerback or linebacker. I don't think he's big enough, really, for either of those roles. He's not tall enough, probably, for corner. Actually, let me look for his height, because he's not like a short running back. But let's see, what is he? He's 5'10". Okay, that's actually a modern corner that's not super well-sized, but that's actually not bad. So yeah, I'd move him to cornerback. The reason I'm moving him to cornerback and not linebacker, which is where you typically move a linebacker or a running back, is because he played cornerback at like an elite level in high school, and he was considering cornerback going into college. He's a crazy good corner, like dozens of interceptions, like crazy good at corner. That's a story that Chad Graff published recently at The Athletic. And that just seems fun to me. Obviously, he'd have to play instead of like Mackenzie Alexander, right? So like, but he's pretty athletic. Like I don't know that wouldn't necessarily, like, he's obviously trained at running back for like 8 years or whatever now, so it's not the same thing. But that's something to consider. And then Anthony Barr to running back. He was a really high level running back even at UCLA. That seems like the most obvious solution there to me. Now at running back, now you still have a high level player. Plus, you're not going to get much of a drop off if Anthony Barr turns out not to be a good running back, and it's a position that matters a lot less. So you do that. Linebacker is probably the position that matters least on the defense, except for the Vikings. It matters quite a bit more because of the way that they structure their defense. So you are going to have a problem there, right? Where you're going to have Chaz Surratt, Ryan Connolly, or Nick Vigil, probably Nick Vigil, play linebacker, and you're probably not in a great spot. But that's probably the position that can stomach that. So I think that's the position swap I make. These guys have played these positions before, so it was a little bit easier for me. But yeah, and if Dalvin Cook can't hack it at cornerback, we can move him to linebacker and bump Nick Vigil down. But yeah, obviously by the rules, has to start. But you start him at corner, he loses some weight. That's not working out. Spend 2 weeks making sure he gains weight. He plays safety in the meantime, then move him back to linebacker.
Next question is from Raul, who asks, how does Irv Smith Jr.'s role change this year? How was he used last year, percentage of the time on the field, and in what position and what sets? I fear he perfectly replaces Rudolph's role, and that would not take advantage of his route running skills.
So he's definitely not going to replace Rudolph in terms of role or the things that they'll ask him to do, and Mike Zimmer was pretty clear about that. Clint Kubiak was also clear that he was excited about Irv Smith and the fact that he's going to get more to do. Mike Zimmer said that Irv Smith's role won't expand. It's more Tyler Conklin. Kind of funny. It's almost as if there's a competing narrative here. I don't think that there's a huge actual competing narrative here. I think both that the types of things Irv Smith will be asked to do are largely the same. And so that kind of satisfies the conditions essentially of what Mike Zimmer said about his role. I also think he'll get to do it a lot more often, which satisfies what Clint Kubiak was basically saying when he was kind of excited about what Irv Smith might be able to do this year. As for like the amount of time he was on the field, I mean, he was on the field a fair amount last year, but it wasn't like he took 545 snaps last year. There's about 1,000 snaps on offense. Let me take a look at how many snaps Kirk Cousins took, because that will give us he took 100% of the offensive snaps that mattered. So we'll just use that as a percentage. So there were 1,082 snaps from Kirk Cousins last year. So it's a little bit more than 50%. But the last 4 or 5 games, you didn't have Kyle Rudolph. So if I'm going to look at the first 11 weeks of the season, and Irv Smith missed week 10, so we'll skip that. But if we just kind of add up, so he had 342 snaps. If we add up everything that Kirk Cousins did in those games, which actually there's got to be an easier way to do this, but I'm an idiot. And there we go. So he took, that seems like not that many. I gotta do that again. There's no way he took fewer snaps as soon as Kyle Rudolph. Oh, because he missed a week. That's why. I'm an idiot. Let's see, 58 plus 64. So 502. So 325 snaps out of 502. So he took 65% of snaps last year. That was already pretty high. I would imagine that gets up to 80 or whatever. Let's see, what did Kyle Rudolph do last year? I mean, because he wasn't like a starter, so it's not. I mean, he was a starter, but he wasn't getting the same kind of roles as last year. So if we just take a look at what Kyle Rudolph did, I mean, he started all those games, so I should. All right, so he took 394 snaps in that same amount of time, which was 502. So that's 78%. So yeah, exactly 80. So I would expect Irv Smith to take 80% of the snaps next year.
Next question is from Ryan, who asks, for a Reefs campaign promises corner, with Riley Patterson hitting the pup, who do we address angry letters demanding the kicking competition that we were promised?
I mean, you should have written those letters a long time ago. Riley Patterson missed so many kicks in minicamp that I was surprised he wasn't cut. But it turns out he was missing practices because of injury after that, and so the Vikings couldn't cut him without an injury settlement. So they are probably hoping that he gets healthy so that they can cut him without having to pay him, is my guess. But like, he should have been cut a while ago, and the fact that he was hurt is kind of protecting him from an injury settlement, which the Vikings might just do eventually anyway. But yeah, there was no, as of like June, there was no kicking competition. So you've been writing these letters a while ago. Otherwise, address the letters to Rick Spielman.
Yeah. Professor Poop is back and says, this past week I was analyzing a particularly fascinating stool sample, and for obvious reasons, I noticed that my mind started to drift toward the potential Vikings offensive line training camp lineups. Which competition are you most interested in? Is there a chance we go with both rookies?
Well, yeah, actually, yeah. So those two questions are basically the same to me, because that competition between Wyatt Davis and Dakota Dozier is the most interesting one. Because I think Christian Darrisaw is just going to take the job from Rashad Hill, assuming he's going to be completely healthy. Remember, he missed a portion of training camp because he was continuing to recover from surgery, which he had just not too long prior to minicamp. So we're going to see Ezra Cleveland at left guard. We're going to see Garrett Bradbury at center. We're going to see Brian O'Neill at right tackle. So for me, I don't know that Wyatt Davis is going to win the job from Dakota Dozier. We actually, if you take a look at the list of third-round guards, many of them do not start right away. Most of them don't start right away. They mostly eventually start. Like, if you get a third-round guard, at some point you're expecting them to start. And that's been reflected in the behavior of teams over the past 10 years, is that those guys eventually do end up starting. But they don't necessarily always start as rookies. And they're usually pretty bad as rookies. Now, the average third-round guard is better than Dakota Dozier was last year, but that's a low bar, and that's actually and that's therefore not saying a lot. So, the most likely outcome is that he is better than Dakota Dozier, and therefore should start. Because the Vikings' kind of reticence to play rookies, which I've talked about before, is overdone. It's not as true as it always seems to be, but there is something there. I wouldn't start, ringing the alarm bells or anything like that if he doesn't start in week one, but that would be a pretty concerning sign, right? That he couldn't beat out Dakota Dozier. But that's the most interesting battle on that front. Most interesting battle writ large. We're going to be talking about wide receiver 3 a lot, in my articles and on this podcast. We're going to be talking about linebacker 3. The most interesting one to me is what the defensive end rotation is going to look like opposite Danielle Hunter, right? Like, I assume that Stephen Weatherly is going to start. There's a chance that he's not going to. Is Patrick Jones going to win it? Is Janarius Robinson going to win it? Is DJ Wanham going to win it? How heavy are they rotating in? That's something I'm going to be paying attention to.
Next question is from Stezo, who asks, what is Arif's view of how The Athletic created the consensus board for the NHL draft? Will it be used by The Athletic for other sports as well? And how does he assess the draft done by the Wild?
I don't even know who they drafted, so I've not read any. I bet their draft sucks. I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how the draft. I don't know how they did. I haven't compared their stuff. I haven't looked at the consensus board. But they did ask me about how to craft the consensus board. And they were forced to use a different process than the one I came up with for the NFL, in large part because the data that exists for the NFL is not really as available as it is for the NHL. And so the stuff that I was working off of, from a mathematic perspective and stuff like that, to construct the board, it just wasn't available to them. They also consulted like data scientists, which is probably smarter than consulting me. But so that all came into it. So they had to use a different process than I did. I don't want to go into too many details because I don't know what The Athletic lets me say about that. But they did. And then another sport reached out to me as well, which I guess that leaves like not a ton to the imagination because it's probably either baseball or basketball, but it could be soccer. Maybe it's soccer. But another vertical reached out to me about the consensus board. So at least one other sport is considering it. I can't say that they will do it.
Well, I can tell you that the Minnesota Wild had an excellent draft. It's because they haven't been good the last couple of years, and they did in fact have most people are grading it very high. So you can just take that take. Corey asks, when is Kirk's quarter season meltdown happening this year? Early as usual, or does he tease our fandom by being elite at the start of the year?
So if this is like a mathematical curse, it can't happen this year, right? This is a 17-game season. There's no, because games are integers, right? There's no 3.5th game, the 3.5th game.
I mean, you could be in the middle of week 4 at halftime and all of a sudden just start playing terribly. We've seen this. You can go full Delhomme.
I mean, you could, but Kirk is a very consistent quarterback. Well, actually, that's not true. He's consistent across seasons. Inside of games, he goes on streaks. So maybe that's not true. So maybe that could happen. It's kind of weird. He's like streaky in games, but like game to game to game, like he's a fairly consistent quarterback. That's a good point. I don't have an answer.
I feel like
I'm going to say it's a math-based curse, and the math doesn't work out.
I feel like what you're trying to say is that it doesn't work because Kirk Cousins can't handle like decimal points and fractions. Is that what you're trying to say?
He's a pretty big nerd. I can't imagine that that bothers him.
Something like that. Also, side note, there's a scene in season 3 of The Sopranos where a bar owner loses his bar betting on the Vikings, and the Vikings miss an extra point, causing them not to cover. How have we not talked about this on the show before?
When I saw this, I was like, is that true? And like you didn't know, so you Googled it, and it was on Reddit.
Yep.
Which of course makes it true.
Yep. Well, it's on the Minnesota Vikings subreddit, and as a result, it has to be true.
Right. Well, I mean, this is also like easily verified. Like if they posted on the Minnesota Vikings subreddit, somebody could just be like, "Yeah, I watched The Sopranos, a famously famous show," and that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's
easily verifiable.
It's either true or it's a picture of Elizabeth Winstead, whatever. Like,
right. Those are the two things in the Minnesota Vikings subreddit. Exactly. Things that are true about the Vikings. Or Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
Exactly. Like that. These are the things. So apparently that's a thing. I enjoy that thoroughly. Bethany asks, are the Chargers trying to become rivals with the Vikings? No, it's just that their PR people on Twitter are really good at getting reactions. And when you are a PR person, especially an intern, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get clicks and likes and whatever.
I think that they're like kind of are. I don't know. Because when we say a PR team of a team is doing something, I think that means the team is doing something. Like, I don't know that Justin Herbert is trying to become rivals with the Vikings. I don't know that whoever the head coach, it's not Anthony Lynn anymore, is it? Who's the head coach of the Chargers? I should know this.
I feel like you're paid to know this sort of thing.
I am paid to know this sort of thing. I wrote an article about the Chargers. No, it's Brandon Staley. God damn it. I don't think like Brandon Staley is trying to become a rival with the Minnesota Vikings. But I would imagine that if the PR team is doing stuff or the social team is doing stuff to foment that, then yeah, because like the Vikings tweeted out something a while back that like it was, or somebody tweeted out that Justin Jefferson is like one of the best route runners in the league, and they left off Keenan Allen, and the Chargers objected, and the Vikings were like, eat it. And then later, the Madden ratings for the top 10 receivers came out, and Justin Jefferson's not on the list, and Keenan Allen is on the list, and so the Chargers added the Vikings. And there's this whole thing, and it kind of builds off of last year when there was an argument about whoever the offensive rookie of the year was. Is it Justin Jefferson, who was like the best or second best receiver at his position last year, or Justin Herbert, who was like 18th at his position last year, but also did a better job than most rookie quarterbacks do, versus Justin Jefferson, who did not as much of a better job versus other high-level rookie receivers, I guess. Like,
but just did more of it.
Right. Like, so you can make the argument pretty easily that in the last, 20, 30 years, right? That like, you've got Randy Moss and Odell Beckham and Josh Gordon, and these guys had like better rookie seasons, or maybe it wasn't Josh Gordon's rookie season. Whoever knows what season Josh Gordon played, the one season. They all had better rookie years, right? Which like, yeah, okay. Anquan Bolden, maybe, right? But like, yeah, they had better rookie seasons. They maybe didn't get as many yards. Well, Odell Beckham got like more yards per game, but he was like suspended to start the season or something, or injured. And you can make the argument, but like last 30 years, who had a better rookie year than Justin Herbert? And not many. I still think that argument isn't very good because it relies on the volume of attempts that Herbert had and less about his level of play, because like both Russell Wilson and Robert Griffin had better rookie quarterback years than Justin Herbert. But either way, there's this argument that maybe it's more impressive to have a good rookie at quarterback than it is at wide receiver, and so he should be the offensive rookie of the year. And so that was like the thing between Vikings fans and Chargers fans, right? And I guess it turns into Justin Jefferson versus Keenan Allen, a rivalry that has been manufactured out of thin air and only exists on Twitter, I guess. But like, I guess like that the Chargers Twitter team, I guess maybe you're probably more right that it's more just about engagement metrics and less about the Vikings, but like,
or some PR group being like,
what's the difference?
Some PR group being like, we need a rivalry of some kind.
You're right. Let's choose an NFC team.
we need somebody. Hey, are we playing them this year? Great. All right.
But, hey, hold on. I mean, like, but like they have, they like when Keenan Allen wore a Raiders hat, people got like wicked mad about that. Like they've got rivalries, but yeah, I mean it's the Chargers.
Yeah,
how intense are
somebody had tweeted out that every Chargers fan is like 20 and your social media proves it. Like
it's kind of I mean
a bit on the nose. Michael Kurtz asks, if the Vikings do make it to the Super Bowl sometime, do you feel that it is your obligation to fly out and go to that game, or are you like me and would rather watch it on TV alone with all the lights off in the corner of your room?
I have to imagine that this is directed at the podcast and not at me, because it is my professional obligation to go out to that game. But the podcast, I think we would go. Like the Norse Code would have a show.
I feel like we would I at least be in the city that it was happening in.
Yeah, I don't know that we'd be able to use Norse Code to fund a ticket for you, James. I'm sorry.
Hey, I understand. I had all sorts of fun plans for the Vikings, potential Viking Super Bowl in Minnesota, and had like guests lined up for like daily show. Like I had stuff like potentially like ready in case the Vikings didn't mess that up completely.
Oh, that's why they lost.
Yeah, it was because I started to plan.
Yeah. Rough.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at this year. Offbeat Skull Chant asks, are there any games this year that you believe are essentially unwinnable for the Vikings?
No. Okay, I mean, like, come on, right? Like, it's the Vikings, right? Like, they'll never do anything that you expect them to do, and when you expect very strongly that they'll do something, that's when they screwed up. Because, like, remember a couple of years ago, they were 17-point underdogs to the Buffalo Bills, and they gave that up. I could just as easily believe that if they were 17-point underdogs, they would win. And the worst thing about that is if they were ever 17-point underdogs this season, the season is in the crapper, right? Like at that point, you want them to lose for the draft pick, and that's when they'll win. Right when people are thinking, yeah, man, if the Vikings lost, that'd be great because they get a top 10 pick, maybe a top 3 pick, and because if you're 17-point underdogs, that's what you're competing for, right? a top 3 pick, and they'll be able to get, Spencer Rattler or something. They can finally free themselves of Kirk Cousins. Or, hey, they've got so much confidence in Kellen Mond, they can finally use a top 3 pick on an offensive lineman, because technically Matt Khalil was a top 4 pick, and that's obviously where they went wrong with that pick.
Clearly.
Right. Yeah, clearly. If he had been picked at 3 and they'd never traded with the Browns, he would have been fine. He'd still be the Vikings left tackle. But yeah, I don't think there are any unwinnable games for the Vikings. What game are they most likely to lose? Let's take a look. I mean, now that like Aaron Rodgers is playing for the Packers again, like they're probably going to lose one of those games, if not both. But it was kind of wild.
He's going to feel like the world's biggest horse's ass if he goes out week 2 with a bird bone break injury. Like if he ends up breaking his collarbone again, like week 2, he is going to feel like the world's biggest fool after all of this, all of the last dance and all this stuff. Like,
I can't imagine, so there's going to be that, and you're going to feel embarrassed and stupid. I can't imagine how bitter he would feel too, right? Like the whole talking point with Aaron Rodgers has been, we don't think he'll play because this dude knows how to hold a grudge, which I mean, maybe I don't know what his history with his family is, right? Like maybe that's not a grudge. Maybe there was something very serious, right? And that's why he won't talk to them, and fair enough. But I mean, the dude talks about the chip on his shoulder from falling in the draft a lot. The whole thing is that he can hold a grudge. So if that, and he gets injured and he didn't want to play, dude, that's rough.
Yeah. I wasn't even supposed to be here today.
Yeah.
Big Dante vibes.
But aside from that, the Baltimore Ravens game is probably going to be the most difficult one. Because the Baltimore Ravens, I expect to be quite good this year. I think that Lamar Jackson will continue to progress as a passer. They've got some more receiving talent. Obviously, it's not incredible, but they drafted a pair of receivers. One of them was a gopher. I believe they signed a receiver. And the defense is still pretty formidable, even though they lose pass rushers every year, and it doesn't seem to matter. So that's the one. And then also the Vikings history with running quarterbacks. Who looks forward to that? So yeah, and then obviously they have an away game against the Chicago Bears. So that's week 15.
Obviously,
which I won't be at.
That was going to be my pick immediate. Yeah, that's probably it. Ollie Haney asks, would American professional football be the most pointless Olympic event ever? Also, who could get silver and bronze? I'm thinking UK, New Zealand, or South Africa could send a load of rugby players. They wouldn't be able to throw, but there'd be a lot of fun trick plays.
So there is something called the IFAF, which I believe is the International Federation of American Football. And I've talked to, a coach of one of the IFAF teams. And I was talking before the show, I thought Japan, placed second recently, and I thought Mexico's done well. And I looked it up, and that turned out to be the case. So those two would probably get silver and bronze. But actually, so I think, American professional football will largely be pointless because of the winner. But that's not as interesting, right? Because when they opened up basketball to American professional play, right? And, you got the dream team, it wasn't pointless. And you had some pretty good games from the other teams that were not the United States. And obviously that ended up growing the game. The difference, of course, is that they had, basketball cultures in a bunch of those countries, which they don't really have a football culture in any of these countries. You would expect the United Kingdom and New Zealand and South Africa and Australia and so on to ask some of their rugby players to field a team. But I would still expect Japan and Mexico to do well because they've got a foundation there of people playing football. And that's just more important, I think. If you've got a large enough population, which Japan and Mexico do, you're going to be able to find bodies that'll have the ability to compete against rugby players that don't know how to play football. So yeah, I would expect it to be Japan and Mexico. I think, Germany has a fairly strong local league. And so they'll play pretty well. You maybe be able to get to see Moritz Beringer again. I know that I think it's either Sweden or Norway or both, but I know that they've got kind of a local league as well. So yeah, those are the teams that I'd expect to do well. But also I think for the United States, it'd be funny if you could only get retired players. And by retired, I mean like players that have played at least 5 years in the NFL and can no longer play. That would be funny to me. I would love to see, like, I mean, and you probably get like Peyton Manning, but I'd love to see Brett Favre try again. I'd love to see you try to convince a bunch of offensive linemen to play without bulking back up. So they're still like at their like 180 pound, 210, 220 pound weight. And like play offensive line probably better than the pass rushers they'll be up against. Like, you know, Joe Thomas, right? I don't know how much he weighs. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like 230, but he's like much slimmer now, right? He's not 290, right? He's not 310. And it'd be funny if he could play, right? Like it'd be fun. And you wouldn't ask him to gain any weight. You'd just be like, yeah, you're playing football against this Japanese edge rusher. You got to watch out. He had 16 sacks last year for the IFAF, and that's really impressive because there's only 4 games. So you got to watch out for this guy and just see how he does. Like that would be great. So I would only want exclusively people who have retired from the NFL that have played in the NFL for 5 years.
Infinitely more watchable than the Pro Bowl.
Yeah. And probably less injuries.
Fair. Nolan Kaler asks, question for Norse Code, which CFL quarterback inevitably ends up on the Bears sideline in 2022?
I got to go with Vernon Adams again, right? Like, I've been banging this drum since, what was it, 2016? I love Vernon Adams. He's good. 5'11" quarterback, can run, can pass. Montreal Alouettes legend. Didn't actually play that much for the Montreal Alouettes, but
still a legend.
Yeah, still a legend. A fair number of games, right? So he played in 2019 for them. I think he had like 15 starts because of injury, and didn't lose the job. So like, although I think because Antonio Pipkin was playing ahead of him, I don't remember. But at one point, he also started like a couple of games for them in 2016, and in between he was on at least one other team. But he started a couple of games for them in 2016. I think he was the backup. So that was just like maybe a freak injury. But right now, it seems like he is the starting quarterback for Montreal Alouettes. But, you know, I just like him. So it's him now. I don't know who else is starting in the CFL.
Also, a question for Arif Hassan's deepfake corner, or is it? Which tape would he alter to make his cornerback performance break the internet, a la Tom Brady?
Okay, so this is weird. So, like, for anybody who didn't see this, which, like, congrats? I don't know. Tom Brady, like, we'll link it. But, like, Tom Brady has a Twitter video of him throwing into a jugs machine and it coming back out. And it's fun. And he does it from 10 yards and 20 yards or whatever, right? So I quote tweeted it and I was like, I'm disgusted at how cool this is. It's absolutely gross how awesome this is. And like, I just, it's like a likable tweet. It annoys the hell out of me that I really enjoyed it, right? I enjoy a lot of Tom Brady's Instagram and Twitter content. This bothers me. So I tweet that out and, you know, it got a fair amount of engagement. Obviously not as much as the Tom Brady tweet itself. And like, there's like 20 replies telling me it's like, most of the replies are just like, yeah, this is fun. And like 20 replies telling me it's fake. And it's like, man, obviously it's like, no shit. Like, obviously it's fake, dude. Are you kidding me? Like, I don't have to like point out that the ball has like this really weird floating motion as it enters the jugs machine. It does, but I don't have to point out he's not throwing into a jugs machine. One, because that's not how those machines work. It's constantly spinning, right? And so it just wouldn't work like that. Two, he's got like a pretty famous face. I think he'd want to protect it, right? Like that just sounds like he's just going to set himself up for it. Obviously that didn't happen. I guess Captain Disillusionment, who like his whole thing, it's actually a bunch of really great YouTube videos. I don't watch a ton of them now, but his whole thing is like breaking down like Photoshops or more commonly faked videos and CG videos, and explaining how you can tell and what evidence is. And he tweeted out a thing, and like a couple of people tweeted that at me. And then someone else like was like a day later was like, I told you it was fake, Arif, and tweeted out like the fact that he tagged his like graphic design artist or his video editing artist or whatever, right? And it's like, I never said it wasn't fake. I just said it was cool. Like, I thought the Avengers was pretty cool, man. I didn't think that was real. Like, what the hell? So weird.
You're not sitting in the back going, that doesn't look like the Mets field at all. Like,
right? Like,
why are there
I can't believe they rebuilt the Pittsburgh Stadium after Bane destroyed it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the most unrealistic part of that whole movie was Hines Ward.
Hines Ward was the kick returner.
As the kick returner. And then he scored and was like the most athletic person on the field. Like, clearly.
Right. But yeah, so which tape would I alter? So my initial response was Darrelle Revis, right? It's like, I'd want to be the best corner, obviously. And I thought about it, and it's like, it'd be kind of funnier if it was like just an obviously super well-balanced, super athlete. And like, you know, Darrelle Revis is obviously incredibly athletic, right? But like his athleticism isn't obvious. Kind of in the same way that if you just watch Randy Moss running downfield, you don't know that he's fast. Now, his athleticism is obvious for a bunch of other reasons, like when he mosses people or whatever, right? But like, Darrelle Revis' athleticism as one of the most athletic corners in the game isn't obvious in the same way. Like Champ Bailey's was more obvious. So I'm trying to figure out kind of who I would pick, and I think I just pick. Now I just kept on going through like whose athleticism is obvious, and I decided not even to do that. I just want Antoine Winfield. I just want to lay people out because that's just a much better way to win a Twitter argument, right? Like it's like, have you played the game? And then you show up, you know, a video of you getting like 30 picks. That's a pretty good way to win a Twitter argument, but defeating a guard on a block and tackling a 260-pound running back or whatever, I think it's a better way to win that argument.
It's either that or we put you on a receiver instead and just put you on like DK Metcalf or something. Be like, that's intimidating enough. That works.
Yeah, right? So I think I'd pick Antoine Winfield, but you know, any all-pro Hall of Fame cornerback, I'm comfortable with being deep faked onto.
Let's go to Kenneth Allen, who asks the question, if Arif Hassan got a coaching job where he was wildly unqualified for. So any, to quote you, which team would it be for, excluding the two obvious choices, the team he covers, and his favorite team?
Come on, Kenneth. God. Yeah, so any coaching job I'd be unqualified for. I would like a run, I guess, as a quality control assistant, so long as I got the training for that. But yeah, man. Yeah, so Eddie Benoit, who wrote a bunch of glowing stories about Sean McVay, gets hired by Sean McVay onto the Rams staff as a special assistant or like an analyst. I don't know what that entails. He's probably not a coach, but like, I don't know what they're going to ask him to do. Now, remember, Brad Childress was also hired as like a spread team consultant, or spread offense consultant for like the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm fairly confident he didn't do anything. And when Mike Singletary was hired as the special assistant and then assistant linebackers coach, I'm like fairly confident he did not do very much for the Leslie Frazier Vikings. And I don't mean that as in the linebackers played poorly. I mean that like literally his job did not ask him to do very much. Like Fred Puggich did all of that. So yeah, what would I do aside from quality control assistant? I feel more confident talking about receiver play than any other element of positional football play. So I guess I would attempt and of course fail at being a wide receivers coach. Like I've read more books on how to play wide receiver. Like I think Jay Norvell's Complete Wide Receivers is a really great book, for example, on how to do that. And I just feel like I've read a lot of books on offensive line play, but I feel like that's just a lot more specialized. Like you have to grow up a little bit more into it. So yeah, I guess it would be wide receiver. Now, of course, I did play cornerback the brief moments I played football, and I don't mean on a Twitter video clip, which also I was playing cornerback, but like, you know, in middle school, in like a very tiny bit in high school, I played cornerback, so that's like my experience. But I think I would probably try to coach receivers because I feel like I know more and I'm more confident in receiver stuff.
Kyle Sleeby asks, if you had to call the offensive plays for an entire Vikings regular season game...
What's with me being a coach? What's going on?
What variance in... The people are inspired. If you had to call the offensive plays for an entire Vikings regular season game, what variance in point/drive would you expect versus Clint's play calling? How about if you called the defensive calls, assuming the team doesn't audible significantly more from your plays than they would QBX or Zims?
So the problem with this question is I don't know if I'm doing anything else aside from calling offensive plays. So if I am part of the install plan as the offensive coordinator, if I have all the offensive coordinator duties, I think that my performance would be much worse on defense than on offense, right? Versus, Zimmer or Clint, right? Because Zimmer's probably going to put the defense in a really good spot. And I just don't know what Clint is going to do. So I think that my performance would vary more negatively, obviously, in both situations, but vary more defensively just because of how much I expect Zimmer to do a better job from the whole of the defensive coordinating or offensive coordinating job. But if I'm just calling plays and if I know what all those plays do, and I've got the play card in front of me and literally the only thing I'm doing all week is I'm like in the meeting rooms and I'm looking at the play cards and I'm learning the terminology and I'm part of the game plan and I learn kind of what tendencies we're going for and stuff like that. And then on game day, I'm calling them, right? If I don't do any of the coaching or coordinating or install or whatever, then I think I would probably do better, probably still on offense, but I think it's closer versus like Clint's play calling. Because I'm more comfortable with kind of the numbers of the way broad play calling trends work on offense versus defense. So for example, I'd still set the team back, obviously, but I think I would set the team back a lot less because I'm more comfortable, like we discussed last week, passing on second down and stuff like that. I obviously look for advice, but yeah, I think that there's that. But I think the reason I think it would be closer on defense than previously is because Mike Zimmer's a really good coach, and I think what he does really well goes outside of play calling to a huge degree. And part of this the assumption here is that no one is audibling significantly outside of normal, right? But also, like, I think defensively, that defense you can kind of ask it to do a lot, and they'll be able to perform well. Like, I think offensively, you call certain plays. And, a defense has seen enough, or there's enough tells, or there's just not something you don't know about offensive play calling that they pick up on, right? And they'll be able to burn you. Defense, there's a lot less variance in the stuff that you can do, in terms of like packaging together zone and man versus packaging together routes, where I just feel like it's a little bit harder for an offense to take advantage of what you do. So if I called cover 2 every play, obviously offenses would like destroy me, right? But if I like mix it up between cover 7 and cover 8 and cover 2, and this is the front I want, and this is where I want the zone landmarks to be, the way the different plays work out, I just feel like there's a little bit less there. I just think that Zimmer's still so much better, given what we know about him versus Clint, given that we don't know anything about him, that I'm still but either way, we're the worst in the league is the thing. So
that is an important caveat.
Yeah. But how much we are the worst by is probably less on offense than on defense.
Yeah. Also, for Arif's child rearing corner, thinking about if I want to become a parent or not, how do you weigh the negatives of bringing a child into the world that will most certainly be worse off economically, environmentally, and potentially politically than we have it today, with the positives of being a parent and raising them to be more empathetic and community-oriented than we were raised? Is it our responsibility to make a better generation, or is it better to acknowledge when the boat is sinking? Boy, just don't do it then. Eddie Crane asks, are you taking the over-under at 0.5 guest appearances on InfoWars by people currently employed by the NFL between now and the end of the season?
Currently employed by InfoWars. So the only two that I know of are Alex Jones, they're turning the frogs gay, and Paul Joseph Watson. Those are the only two I know are employed by InfoWars. because they're the ones that have the most YouTube response videos, honestly.
Or used to. I don't think they're on there anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, they're not on YouTube, but the YouTube the videos responding to
that gotcha.
Yeah. I was like, they took down YouTube response videos? That's kind of weird. No. So I don't know who else is on InfoWars, but I would imagine if you had asked this 2 years ago, I'd take the over at 0.5. I'd take the over, which obviously didn't happen, so I would have lost. But now InfoWars, I think, is a lot less popular, and which we know. But also, there's just been more that's like happened. Like Alex Jones has been taken to court, right? Like Joe Rogan won't have Alex Jones on a show anymore, right? And so I think I would probably take the under, despite, the fact that InfoWars is a big part of the vaccine hesitancy movement. I think that there's going to be someone currently employed by the NFL running a podcast that's going to bring on somebody that's going to say something pretty irresponsible with the vaccines, but I don't know if it's going to be by InfoWars. So over on controversial anti-vax figure, under on that guy or girl being from InfoWars.
And just for Arif's beekeeping corner, he says, my larger hive is just boiling over with bees. I've never seen one of my hives so jam-packed.
Congrats.
I wonder what race he's using for that.
What the hell, man?
Does Arif think I should attempt to split the hive, or is it too late in the summer to attempt it? Would I be compromising that hive's ability to endure the winter?
This one is a tough question, it turns out. I'd like to point out that, like, out of all the corners, aside from, like, the passive aggressiveness in the relationship and the child rearing corner, this one has, like, survived the bit longer, mostly because of Eddie Crane, but not solely because of Eddie Crane, which I just find fascinating. Maybe it's because of all the memes about the things I say about bees, which I am quoting someone else on the entire time I say the stuff that's getting memed. It's not my words. Want to be clear about that?
Has nothing to do with your opinions on bee races or anything like that.
I don't have opinions on
bee race supremacy.
Breeds of bees, I would say, is how I would classify them.
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of different words you could use to describe 1,000-year, like...
Yeah, subspecies, family types, genetic groups. That one's actually a little bit dicey too. Anyway, so I did my beekeeping research on this one again, as always, because all of the stuff I say about the beekeeping stuff comes from someone else. I'll make that clear. So I looked it up, not from any of the websites that I've looked up previously, mostly because I didn't appear at the top of Google, but one website recommended essentially yes, although they didn't have an opinion on the time frame here, and that's because bees, if they don't have ample room in their hive, they swarm to find a new home with new space. So that can cause obviously a lot of problems. You don't want bee swarms. If they swarm, half or more of your bees will take off with the old queen. The bees left behind will sense that the queen is gone and make a new queen by feeding royal jelly to her larvae. When you split a hive in a controlled setting, this is from keepingbackyardbees.com, you force the bees into a swarming situation on their own, but it's controlled. It's best to split the hive when it's getting very full. The bees will begin preparing to make another queen, and you will know this by finding queen cells in your hive. To properly split a hive, you should add a frame with one of these queen cells, so you're going to have to look up how to identify a queen cell, to a new hive box. Then alternate empty frames with frames filled with brood from the original colony. So that's how you split your hive, and it sounds like something you should do based on this advice, because it sounds like they will attempt to find room otherwise, and behaviorally, I hear it's not that great when they feel cramped. So there's that. But the problem is, perfectbee.com points out that you should probably not attempt to split a hive that has not been overwintered. You should at least try and split hives that are second year or more. And because, you're splitting the resources in half too, and they need those resources to survive the winter. And one of those resources is heat, right? So we are pretty late, but I think you'll probably have enough time to repopulate, but it is tough because overwintered bees have a substantially better rate of surviving a winter after you split them than bees that have not gone through that process. So this one's pretty tough. I would do more research than asking your favorite beekeeping podcast, which is still probably not us, honestly. because we're not a beekeeping podcast.
I mean, we're making strides, and I feel like that's important. Joe Justice asks, for a Reef Supernatural Beings corner, how can
God
one...
damn it.
How
Can't say it like that.
Nope, that's what we're doing. How can one learn more about shadow people and or lizard people? Where can I learn about summoning such entities without hexing important things such as the moon?
So from my understanding of Googling lizard people, something that nobody should do, is that you don't need to summon them, especially lizard people, because they're already here. So no need to worry about hexing the moon in that case. Also, from my understanding, the moon understands intentions, I guess. So it'll know if you're trying to hex them or not. Hex it or not. The moon uses they, them pronouns. I don't know.
I'd have to see their email signature.
You're right. Yeah, right. So, you'll probably be fine if you want to do it. But as for summoning a reptilian, which I believe is what lizard people are called, you just have to kind of signal that you know what's going on, and they'll find you. It's probably not good because they want to shut you down, but if you want to know more about reptilians, which I want to stress, you don't. I guess a popular, since debunked conspiracy theorist, David Icke, who has been disproven wrong many times, has a number of fascinating books on the subject.
All right, then. I thought you were going to point people off to like Baby Witch Twitter and just...
No, I don't think they summon a lot of lizard people on Baby Witch Twitter. Plus, you don't want to go to Baby Witch Twitter. You want to go to Witch Twitter because Baby Witch Twitter already screwed it up.
I suppose you're right. Don from Ohio asks, Arif and I agree that bingo should be an Olympic sport, naturally. But what other activities would you like to see in the Olympics in the near future? Cornhole, extreme coupon shopping, Iron Chef, lamp collecting?
You can't make lamp collecting an Olympic sport. James would dominate. That's not fair.
That is how that works.
No, Iron Chef would be dope. I would watch that. I watched like a bunch of the Food Wars anime, and I was ensorcelled. Don't watch that. A, at all, but B, with like kids around. It's a very lewd anime. But the food competition stuff was like really well done, and I love Iron Chef.